So welcome to December. Can anybody else believe it? It's already here. It's like, oh my goodness. It's a wonderful time of year, isn't it? It's a time of year where we celebrate the light. And that really goes back way, and I think in our DNA, from the time of recognizing there was no light after hours unless you had a fire or a candle. There was no electricity like we have today. And I think right now, this time of year, we're starting to see the lights come up in all around our city and on our houses. Maybe you decorated your house with some simple lights like this one. Maybe something inside a Christmas tree, something simple, just hanging a wreath. But it's a festive time of year, isn't it? And it is a time of light because we've got shorter days and darker nights. I know I got up this morning, it's like, wow, it's really dark in here. It seems there were no street lights or anything on. So just can be a dark time of year. So the idea is that the theme this month for us is living as the light. And a lot of times you hear living in the light. And as I reflected on that, I thought, no, living as the light is more in alignment with our teaching, more in alignment with our Science of Mind teaching. In December, as the celebration of light, we're going to be looking at the inner and the outer lights, all of the lights around that we see, and also the inner light that we are. And this time of year, there are a lot of festivals or celebrations or sacred days that also acknowledge and celebrate this idea of the returning of the light. There's Diwali, which is a Hindu festival. There is the winter solstice that is coming up, that is a celebration of the seasonal equinox. There is Christmas, of course, and of course there's Hanukkah, which begins this evening at sundown. And we have our menorah on the altar today in honor of Hanukkah and our celebration of that. And that's also what our talk is. Today is about Hanukkah. And you may recall the story. It was the story of the miracle of the oil. The story of the miracle of the oil. It seems that there was some cleansing in the temple that was happening, and there was only a little bit of oil left for one day, but it lasted for 8 days. So it's the 8-day week. Anybody else feel like they have an 8-day week sometimes? Yeah, right? And burning the candle at both ends takes on new meaning there. But that's our talk, the 8-day week. So what is that story that led us to this idea of a miracle? What's the story? You probably know it, but I'm going to tell it anyway. It seems that our Greek friends, the Romans, decided that they needed to rule Jerusalem. And not only did they need to rule the Jewish people through law and through taxation, but they wanted to tell them how to worship. You must worship our God. And isn't that the age-old challenge? One human being telling another how they need to worship and what God they need to worship, right? That's an age-old challenge that we see. And the Romans had the Hellenistic gods at that point, Zeus and Apollo and all that stuff. And so they were worshiping the multiple gods, whereas the Jewish tradition was the one God, right? The Jewish tradition was the one God. And the Greeks went so far the Romans went so far as to move Zeus into the temple. Move Zeus into the temple. And that really upset many of the Jewish faith there, many of the loyalists. And it seems in the Bible that we have a lot of stories around the idea of worshiping false idols, all the way back to Moses in the Old Testament. And when he was up on the mountain talking to God, remember that? And the Israelites are doing what? They're melting down all of their gold to make a golden calf that they can worship. Remember that? And there are other stories of idols and things. So the message is as true today as it was then about worshiping false idols. And the way we sometimes do it today is through worshiping things outside of ourselves, such as money or power or success or fame, those sorts of things. Anything outside of ourselves that we place our power in. And the interesting thing is when we worship outside idols, false idols outside of ourselves, put our power in something outside of ourselves, what have we also done? We've given it the power to take away our joy, haven't we? We have given that now the power to take away our joy. If we are feeling very powerful because we have money, and suddenly we don't have money, we're not going to be powerful anymore. We're not going to be happy any longer because we've given that power away there. And that is one of the differences. I know many of you know this from your studies in the foundation class, but that's one of the differences between New Age and New Thought teaching. New Age teaching has a tendency to put power in external things, such as crystals and aromatherapies and things like that. Not that those are wrong, it's just not part of our teaching in the science of mind, that we believe the power of spirit lives and moves and has its being within us. Within us. So becoming dependent on that outside source, again, our power can go away. If we're fueled by our ego, and our work and our success, and that changes or shifts or goes away, or even retirement, we can suddenly feel like we have no purpose. We can suddenly feel like we have no definition as to who we are. We've all heard stories or even seen movies around that idea of, okay, I'm no longer the whatever I was, and I'm no longer have a definition. You know, and you hear people introduce themselves, well, I used to be, I used to do, as opposed to who they are today. They're defining themselves by the outside thing. So this ancient and still relevant teaching is, again, giving our power to those false idols. When we recognize, like we teach here, successful living from the inside out, the power lies within us. The power lies within us. And it's things like self-love. Joanne did a beautiful workshop for us here several months ago on self-love and how empowering that was for us. And inner light. Inner light. These are universal principles that we are all familiar with and that resonate deeply within our souls. And when we give that away, we're trying to seek that power or that light even outside of ourselves, it can result in things like codependency, addiction, depression, sadness, disappointment. So developing, I think, no surprise here, a spiritual practice allows us to find that power within ourselves, to find the light within ourselves, to connect with Source, to connect with Spirit within us. And I believe that to be the path to transformation and illumination in our lives. I believe that to be the path. But y'all know that about me, though, don't you? We talk about that every week. So let's move on with our story. Our wonderful friends have taken over the sacred temple. They have taken it over. And we're told that some of the Jews did resist. They did resist this, and others, including some of the high priests, actually converted during this time. However, out of that resistance emerged a leader. Out of that resistance emerged Judah Maccabee. Anybody heard of the Maccabees? Susie has. Those wild and crazy Maccabees. They were crafty and fierce warriors, but they had a very small army. They had a very small rebel army, much like Luke Skywalker and the Star Wars guys. A modern-day Maccabees story, right? So they were able to defeat and turn away the offending Greeks and to take back their holy temple. They were able to take back the holy temple. But now what? We've got this building back, but it's been defiled by the Greeks. All of their beautiful artifacts have been stolen, and their menorah is gone, and this word just popped in my head, the unclean, were in their temple, so they've got to cleanse the temple, right? Through tradition, they've got to cleanse the temple top to bottom and restore the light back into the temple, the light of the menorah. So Judah and his followers then had to come back in and help rebuild the altar. And again, since that golden menorah had been taken, they built a new one, but all they had was some cheap metal to build it out of. So they built the new menorah. And now they're ready to light it, to restore the light into the temple. And that's where they find the one little cruse of oil, a one-day supply of the blessed and sacred oil to burn in the menorah. Well, what are they going to do? We've got to light the menorah, so they went ahead and lit it. And through their faith and their belief, it lasted that 8 days. Not 1, 2, 3, or 5, but 8 full days of illuminating the temple. And then in memory of this miracle, that's why we celebrate the 8 days of Thanksgiving and lighting of the Hanukkah candles throughout the Jewish community. So this is a nice story, right? It's a nice story. It has a happy outcome. It has the underdog winning, so to speak. But is it really relevant for us today? Is this story still relevant for us today? Well, I think so, if we can look a little deeper maybe into some of the meanings that are associated with this. The first one being oil. Oil is used for fuel as well as anointing. And symbolically, it means wisdom. Oil symbolically means wisdom. So when they infused the menorah with the fuel of wisdom, it expressed as light, which was symbolic of Spirit of God. The light is symbolic of God. So if we think of Spirit as life within, and fuel as a metaphor for that life within us, that animating presence, if you will, we can begin to understand a little more around the symbology of the story. Now, many scholars, as I was researching this, are saying, oh yeah, the battles occurred. The battles really occurred in the taking of the temple and all of that stuff. But we're not so sure about that oil miracle story thing. We're not so sure that happened. And it's not really important to the history of what occurred at that time. Well, I beg to differ. Because I don't think we'd know the story of the battles if we didn't have the story of the miracle. Because the miracle is what has kept the story of the tradition going on, I think. Because that's pretty cool. Another battle in history, we have several of those to talk about. So the temple was dark. The temple was dark, both physically and spiritually, because the Greeks had defiled it with their Zeus statue and so forth in there. So this was, again, part of that illumination and liberation process for them. Ernest Holmes, who is the founder of Centers for Spiritual Living and also the author of the Science of Mind text, he says, darkness is always the symbol of ignorance, while light is the symbol of wisdom and truth. Light is a symbol of wisdom and truth. And this is what the light in our story means. The oil was necessary to restore the wisdom and the truth back into the temple. If you remember, at this time in history, God lived in the temple. That was God's house, literally. Because the Jewish community believed they were nomadic in the beginning with Moses and Aaron and everyone, and they carried the Ark of the Tabernacle, and then they would set up tents in the desert, and then Moses and Aaron would go talk to God in the tent, but they carried God in a box. And then when they built the temple, God had a house. So they didn't have to move around anymore, and everybody could go and visit God's house. So that was the belief at that time. So when the Greeks came in and moved Zeus into God's house, you can understand they were very upset by that. They were very upset by that. So they had to get Zeus back out of there, clean the temple, illuminate it with spirit again, and let God come back home. That was sort of the basic thinking that was going on. So truth and wisdom being restored as light in the temple. But then the other thing that bugged me about it is, why was it 8 days? If we had 1 day's worth of oil, if it lasted 2, that would still be pretty unusual. Maybe 5, 7, if we want to tie it back to the creation story of 7 days. But this was 8 days. So as I looked at the number 8, it's like an infinity symbol. You know what the infinity sign is, right? And what it is the connection of the material and the spiritual. For the one point where the infinity symbol connects is the connection between spirit and material. So the oil was the material piece of it, and the spiritual part was the light or the wisdom returning. And then the other piece of the story I've been told, I couldn't find this to confirm it, is that it took 8 days to manufacture the sacred oil, to infuse it, to press the oil, to infuse it, and then to get it blessed and so forth. So whatever it was an 8-day miracle story that we have for the cleansing of the temple. So in this holy day, holiday, busy day season, I invite us to remember what Ernest Holmes says. He says, there is a light at the center of everyone. This light is never obliterated, but it does seem that it is often obscured by various reasons. And I think that's true of each of us and people that we run into. That the light is always there within us, but it can sometimes appear obliterated. But only we can do that, right? Only we can put the basket over our own light. Or if we get frustrated with someone else, that's usually when we can do that. So I would like to invite us to be the light for others in this season. As you're out and about, as you're in your workplace, in your families, there's a lot happening this time of year. We have busy schedules that have even more stuff put on them for holiday shopping and parties and cards and cooking and family and travel and all of those extra things that get added in. And it can be a stressful time. So I invite us to consider being the light, particularly for others when they're in that place of stress or frustration or fear or even anger or pain or disappointment or heartache, whatever that might be. Choose to be the light for others, to allow your inner light to continue to shine for them. So I want to look at some ways that we can practice our principles this week and take this out into our lives and our world. Number 1, notice and release any false gods. Notice and release any false gods. Notice this week where you may be placing power in things outside yourself. What's really, 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 really important to you? My coffee in the morning, right? It's got some power in that cup. That's silly, but where might we be putting power in things outside of ourselves? Could be money, busyness, anger, resistance, false thoughts, giving others the power to steal your joy. Giving others the power to steal your joy. The cranky clerk in the store, right? The folks that cut you off on the freeway. TSA at the airport, the long lines, any of that stuff. Don't allow them to steal your joy. Be the light in that moment. Number 2, rebel with a cause. If you are feeling personally persecuted by anything outside yourself, rather than using force, and force can be physical or verbal, right? Force can be physical or verbal. Try accessing your inner power. Try accessing your inner power in that moment. Exercise your faith muscle and focus on what it is that you prefer rather than resisting what is coming at you. And I'm reminded of what I lovingly call the ninja Jesus. When he said, turn the other cheek, I think he was simply stepping out of the way of whatever was coming at him, much like the teachings of Kung Fu and so forth. When someone's coming at you with a blow, if you get out of the way of it, the energy goes right by. And that, I believe, is an example of turning the other cheek and just allowing it to go by. Today, if I'm watching the news, and I know many of us don't do that, or if I see something or hear a story about something and it upsets me, I take a moment, I take a breath, and I ask myself, what is upsetting me about this? Is it a sense of justice or injustice? Is it a sense of pride? Is it a sense of wrongdoing, right and wrong, black and white, not my way? Is it a sense of compassion? What is it that has me feeling this upset in this moment? And then I can turn to the opposite of that and hold that in the light and the truth and the knowing of the wholeness of that situation. And that's where my prayer work sits. That's where my prayer work sits. Number 3, tap into your inherent wisdom. We heard Dawn sing that beautiful song about just believe. And in the Science of Mind, we teach that there's one mind and that we all live, move, and have our being within that one mind. So we have access to all of that wisdom is available, intelligence, intuition, at all times. I frequently tell students that the same mind that created the test is now taking the test, so no worries, you know the answers already. You have access to them. And it's said that the voice of God is a whisper until we learn its tone and its warmth and learn to recognize it. And the way that we do that is to be still. To be still. much like the psalmist said, "Be still and know that I am God." So the miracle of Hanukkah is all about the oil. And oil, as we said, represents wisdom. And that single cruse was not enough oil in the mind of humans. Oh, wow, limited thinking, right? There's not enough for one day. But in the mind of God, it was more than enough for one day. It was enough for 8. It was enough for 8. So I invite you to make time, schedule time for your spiritual practices during this busy holiday season. Sometimes when we get stressed, it's the best time to deepen in our spiritual practices. I know we don't think we have time to do that, but it really is the best time to do so. Because it's easy to allow our light to go out. It's easy to allow our temple to become defiled. And sometimes we need a good cleansing. Sometimes we get distracted off of our path. But maybe if you think about spiritual practices as a way of tapping into that universal well of wisdom, as Don said, do we all want, or Joanne actually in the reading, we could all use more wisdom. Could all use more wisdom. So tap into that universal well. Cleanse our own temples, stoke our own fire, our own flame, and allow our light to shine. Be the light this Christmas season, this holiday season. So I want to close this today with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, where he reminds us that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. So in this season of light, I hope you will join me in choosing love. May the light of the season warm you all week. Namaste. So I want to thank you all for being with us this morning. If you were with us for the very first time, we appreciate you taking the time to come this morning and spend an hour with us in service. We hope that you found us to your liking and that you will come back and visit with us again. We've got some beautiful volunteers in the lobby that will meet and greet with you afterwards. If you've got any questions or anything you'd like to share with our community, we do appreciate you. And I invite you now to join me, if you would, in an affirmative prayer as we go within. How good it is to recognize there is one power and presence. And that power, that presence is God. It is the infinite source of all that is, was, and shall be. It is harmony. It is balance, creativity, joy. It is the light of life itself. And I know that all of that is here now present in, through, and as me, in, through, and as each of us in this room, in, through, and as all that is. But there's only one source. And all is created from that. We are that harmony, that balance, that love, that light in expression, in form. And so from that place of knowing, I speak my word for and about each of us here today, knowing that we are the light. We are the light this holiday, holy day season. As we move around in this world of effects and bump into each other with joy and grace and gratitude and love and celebration, kindness, compassion. That we, as Scottsdale Center for Spiritual Living, choose to be the light for others when they're feeling their stress, when they're feeling their upset or their over busyness or even pain, whatever it may be, that we are the light of love throughout this holy day season. And I know for anyone that has anything on their heart this day, as they bring that forward into their awareness, into their heart, that we lift that into this prayer time, knowing, claiming, and accepting the healing, the revelation, the clarity, the demonstration, whatever it is that they are needing, the healing this morning. So it is with a grateful heart, filled with joy and thanksgiving, that I just let this be. I place it into the activity of law, knowing that it's done. It is already so. And we affirm this truth together by saying, and so it is.